Saturday.
What? No, where is he? Oh, I must have missed him. I know him. Know him really well. I'll go find him. Oh, nice. Alex, he's going to be down there?
He's here on practice.
I've got It is week 2 of Panthers training camp. Anish Shroff, Jim Zoki with you. It's the first of 4 live streams that we're going to do throughout training camp. You guys will have a chance to watch a little bit of practice, learn about some of the players, and since we are in training camp mode, Jim, I guess I'll say this. You look like you're in the best shape of your life.
I feel like I am.
Yeah.
I got a little bit better today than I was yesterday, but I think it's always fun when you get to this time of year because so many stories at camp, obviously, and it's just week 2, obviously, too. So a lot to still be told, but, get padded practices coming up and things like that. We'll get a little bit better feel of what's coming up with this football team.
Yeah. Thanks for watching for you guys on YouTube, on Twitter. If you miss any of it, you can go back and watch on Panthers.com. But let's backtrack. You and I watched pretty much every snap last year in 2024. Tale of 3 seasons almost. It was the first couple of games, and then Bryce gets benched, then he comes back. And really the second half of the season, the games against Kansas City and Philly, even though they lost, those are the games that stick out to me where you saw what this offense was capable of, and more importantly, you saw a quarterback who showed he could go toe-to-toe with anybody. Yeah,
he finishes with that flourish with Atlanta at the end with 5 touchdown passes. It was kind of all building towards that end of what he was able to do. But, yeah, they won some games late in the season. They lost, as you said, some really quality opponents, at Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, others along the stretch run where they could have, should have beat Kansas City.
Yep.
Teams that they could have beat, but they were at least competitive. And then they started winning some games and got some confidence, and his play just continued to kind of get more and more mature, more and more confident as we got towards that end.
I go back to what you and I and we all said at the beginning of last year. We said, the litmus test for success a year ago would be to know if by year's end Bryce Young was your quarterback. And it wasn't the most linear path, but when we got to week 18, there was no question.
It was pronounced by the coach Dave Canales at the end. He said, we have our quarterback, which was not the case obviously earlier in the year when he was benched and Andy Dalton came in. Bryce returns, plays well, got better as it went on after that. So it's nice that you got a second-year coach. In some ways, you've got a second-year quarterback, even though it's a third-year quarterback, and that he's in that situation where he knows what's expected of him as the leader. So you're not competing, you're not trying to relearn a new system here. You come in, as we say, with more of a program and less of just a full team concept of you kind of know what you got with an offensive coordinator, with a defensive coordinator, and all the way through.
And one of the things that Bryce has going for him here in year 2, stability. I mean, you've got the same coaching staff, you've got the same GM, the same overarching philosophy now. That matters. It's not just a trigger word here in camp, continuity.
And I think it really began the previous offseason when they addressed the offensive line, because that was the worst thing. He got sacked 62 times his rookie year. Last year, he got sacked 29 times. I know it wasn't as many pass attempts, but that gives you an example of how much better the protection was. So when you brought in Lewis and Hunt and solidified that offensive line, it made everything better, made the run game better, made his protection better, and now you can run your offense when your offensive line gives you those opportunities.
And it also spoke to how Dan Morgan wants to build this team. Former linebacker, he wants to build this from the trenches back. So we saw it with the offensive line investment a year ago, Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis. That unit comes back pretty much intact, and now the offseason impetus was, okay, let's fortify the defensive front. Let's fix a run defense that was historically bad a season ago.
Yeah, and they did that through free agency. They addressed it, obviously, in the draft rotationally with the edge rushers. So I think they did as much as they could in one offseason to go after that. It was disappointing, obviously, that Josie Jewell didn't have his health, that he would be able to come out and play to start the season at least. But with Christian Roseboom, gives you an example. They went out, got a veteran guy, very similar in what he can provide as a linebacker where you don't have that huge drop-off. And now Trevin Wallace in year 2. So you get behind that first line of that defense. You get your inside linebackers in there trying to stop the run. And I think Trevin Wallace is poised to maybe launch a little bit further this year after last year having to take on so much because of the injuries that were around him.
And, you go back to up front, right? Last year, they got hit with injuries on the defensive line. Guys like Shai Tuttle, LeBron Ray had to start 24 games. Those are now depth pieces in 2025. Bobby Brown is sort of what you envision, free agent signing, coming over from the Rams, 6'4", 330. That's what you envision as a nose tackle in a 3-4 defense.
Absolutely. And again, that's what they did with free agency, was really add additions of guys, that veteran guys that can come in, play right away. Tershawn Wharton coming in. You've got a full season of DJ Wanham. Remember, we didn't get him till past the halfway point of last season, out on that edge as an outside linebacker too. But interior defense-wise, nothing bigger than having Derek Brown back. I mean, you got a guy that set a record for tackles for a defensive lineman. him missing essentially all of last season. That's the biggest thing that happened in this offseason is the return to health of Derek Brown, who got back on the practice field here Saturday.
Yeah, so we're seeing the blueprint for how Dan Morgan wants to build this team, and then you take that one step further. Offensive continuity. It starts with the play caller and the head coach, Dave Canales, but you return the entire offensive staff, essentially. We talk so much about, young quarterback, nature versus nurture. I think for Bryce, the way he finished last year, and now you don't have to go learn a new playbook. You just expand on what you learned last year. It's the same offensive line. Chuba Hubbard's back. You add Rico Dowdle. The receiving room has been upgraded. You've got more depth there. To me, all that helps your franchise quarterback.
It does. And the way they use them, too, Anish, I mean, they start, bootlegs and rollouts and things that you didn't see the first season because, as you said, that was a starting point for him under a previous regime. I think the confidence came with him having a variety of what he can do. We know he's smart. He processes things well. He's an accurate thrower of the ball. If you put him in positions where he can succeed, that's what he was able to do in the second time we came back on the field last year.
The last 3 games of last season, Bryce Young accounted for 10 touchdowns, no interceptions. That's passing and rushing touchdowns. But that second element, his ability to run, not necessarily be a runner, but move the pocket, take calculated risks. I thought that opened up a lot offensively for the Panthers. And he's been smart about not taking that big hit.
If you look at his rushing stats the first 2 seasons, they're basically identical. That's what happens when you just stare at a stats page. But when you watch it, to your point, when he decided to run, when he decided to use it, when he shut it down out of bounds, like all that stuff, he did it with a purpose, and it was decisive when he made those moments where he was going to run the football. That adds an element with his feet that really is going to be something that, again, you can build off of that. He's not going to turn into Cam Newton as far as running the ball like he did when Cam was here. But with this coaching staff, I think he's got their trust to know when to run it. Obviously, they've got some great running backs. He's not going to have to do that too often. But when plays break down or a designed run or whatever that happens, I think, Bryce is able to do that now.
Yeah, and the expectations for him, I mean, you just kind of look at some of these numbers. Week 8 through 18, his PFF grade, 6th amongst quarterbacks. In terms of big-time throws, tied for the most in the NFL with Joe Burrow. Almost 47% of his passes went past the first down marker. That was 4th in the NFL. And for all the talk about his size, week 8 through 18, not a single pass was batted down.
And that's a big step. Like I always said, when he came out of college, there was concern. When we had Baker Mayfield here, that was an issue. But part of that was offensive line driven as well. Creating passing lanes for your quarterback to get through. Him knowing where they're available to him out there. You mentioned the big play passing last year. I think he had 30 of 20 yards plus in the passing game. These were not dink and dunks all the time that were building up some kind of stats for him. The big plays were out there. And you mentioned earlier adding weapons, adding T-Mac with that first-round pick. It's been a lot of Adam Thielen the last couple of years when healthy. Missed a big chunk of last year. That's needed. That's important. But now you got some, more downfield experience. You got more downfield potential down there. Xavier Legette in year 2. Jimmy Horn, I know a lot of people talking about that gas, all gas, no brakes. What he could bring as, again, just a throw in as far as platooning him in there a little bit. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to have some more big plays.
Yeah, then you've got Hunter Renfrow, too, who, again, I always caution. I just saw Dabo Swinney out here, his former Clemson head coach. You always caution about what you see in training camp in the first week, but we know what kind of receiver Hunter Renfrow can be when healthy. He is now healthy after a few seasons where we saw his weight drop. He had ulcerative colitis. He seems to have a handle on that. Again, that's another potential piece to this receiving group.
100 catch guy, I should say, back in 2021. And we know, as you mentioned, missed time the last year and a half or so with dealing with illnesses. But he looks completely healthy out here now. And it adds to the competition. I think it's the deepest position group on this team, which was not the case a year or two ago. And you start looking at the veteran guys that are competing, guys that are receivers that also can help in the return game. He brings that. He brings veteran experience. He brings return game ability. So he's not just a receiver.
Yeah, and again, we live in the city, right? You go around town. There is a sense of optimism around this team. Internally, within the building, you heard Derek Brown said it the other day, there is a belief that this team is now back on the right path. The arrow was pointing up at the end of last season, and with all the pieces coming back, obviously Derek Brown being a significant one coming back from injury, there is a strong sense of optimism on that practice field.
It is, and it's warranted. I
Yeah.
think, again, nobody's throwing a parade for going from 2 wins to 5 wins.
Sure.
But it's the potential of what we saw in the stretch run of last year. Listen, it was 1-7 at the halfway point.
I know.
Then Bryce comes in, and things get going. They win against New Orleans. They go to Munich. They beat the New York Giants. And they kind of build off of that energy and that confidence. So, again, you hear Coach talk about it, get a little bit better every day. You hear Dan Morgan not putting like a numerical value on anything they're doing. They're just trying to get better and see when you count them up at the end. If you make the playoffs, great. If you just got better and you laid the groundwork for future success, so be it. Everybody will take all the successes that you can get. But I think they're being methodical in the way that they're trying to build something that will last long term.
Last long term. And again, with Dave Canales now in his second season as the head coach, I think one of the things we learned about Dave last year was he is built for this job. He is built to be an NFL head coach. We were sitting there 2 weeks into the season, and this is, to be perfectly honest, we didn't think it could get worse than 2-15, and it looked worse than 2-15 after 2 weeks. The decision to bench a quarterback who a year prior was taken as the number 1 overall pick was not an easy decision. That turned out to be a brilliant coaching decision. It gave Bryce time to reset. It gave the players time to see that, hey, the system works, because Andy Dalton played really well in week 3. That faith was rewarded, and then Bryce did what he needed to do in the interim, came back a different quarterback. Again, those are not easy decisions, and again, we don't know where this movie is headed, but if it continues in the direction that it was going in at the end of last season, I think years from now we may look back at that decision by Dave Canales as not only a tipping point for that season, a tipping point for the franchise in their narrative arc.
When you take over a team as a coach that inherits a quarterback and personnel, you have to undo a little bit of stuff.
You do.
So you do what you want to do, but you also have to undo what you're doing. And again, not going to point fingers and whatever about the first rookie year and the regime and the coaching staff he had, but there were a lot of voices that were talking to him. He was anointed the starter. A lot was thrown at him right away. And in hindsight, you look back and go, he needed more time. He needed more time to learn, to be a pro. And that time off last year in between where he sat and watched for a number of weeks provided that something he didn't have his rookie year. And when he came back, again, it wasn't gangbusters the first week or two when he came back, but you saw the acceleration as it went on.
And I think that's what gives a lot of folks the hope and the optimism, because it wasn't just one game in a vacuum. It wasn't just week 18 and 5 touchdowns. It was a gradual buildup. The first game against the Saints, played well enough, and he made the crucial plays he needed to play. They find a way to win. Same happened in the game against the Giants in Munich. And I remember we had the bye week after that game. Right. Kansas City's coming to town. And all of us, as much as we wanted to cannonball into the pool, we kind of dipped the one toe in and we said, okay, Saints just fired their head coach. The Giants just cut their quarterback. You got those 2 wins. But this Kansas City game will reveal how much progress is made. And then you walk away from that game. And I think that's when the tide turned. And you kind of saw, he just went toe-to-toe with Mahomes.
Oh, yeah. Kansas City, Tampa Bay, and then just kept it going after that. Got on a roll. Philadelphia, mentioned going down to the wire with them. So I think those weren't wins, but those were building blocks to success, confidence that he had, and led to some wins late in the season, like at the very end against Atlanta. This team went to overtime 4 times last year, and they won 3 of those 4 games. So there is something about, when you talk about culture, like learning to win. I guess, every year it's a different roster. It's not the same guys that are back from last year, but there is a process of learning to win tight games. And that was, I think, another one of the steps that was taken late last season.
Yeah, and again, Bryce, to revisit that Week 18 game, that wasn't a game in a vacuum. There was nothing fluky about that. That was a crescendo of what had been building since he returned. You beat the Saints, you beat the Giants, you go toe-to-toe with Mahomes, you almost beat the Eagles. You go on the road against Atlanta, Week 18, 5 touchdowns, and that was a game where, the defense was really beat up. Remember, all the guys who were out for most of the season were gone. J.C. Horn wasn't playing in that game, and the offense pretty much needed to score every time they had the ball, and they did.
Which was a complete flip of the script from the previous year and early in the season where they got shut out opening day. Was you needed the defense to keep it to like 10 to give the offense, points-wise, an opportunity out there. And by the end of the season, you're putting up 41 points here, 35 points here. So that capability is there. You're not going to do it every single week. And it didn't happen, even every single week during that stretch run, but you saw where that potential was there. And then you build off of that when we talk about the additions that are made this past off season, and you get really excited about that. It'll be fun to see too, like someone like Jatavian Sanders at the tight end position, what he can do in year 2. He's lost some weight. You know, we talk about the receivers. What kind of a factor might he be in this, along with someone like Mitchell Evans, who's a rookie out of Notre Dame, who's skilled at both being a blocker and a receiver to add what you already had in the tight end room.
Yeah, with JT Sanders, he had been playing really well, and then in the Kansas City game, got flipped on his neck, suffered the neck injury. When he came back, wasn't quite the same, but he trended really well prior to the injury. He's now in year 2. The rookie class last year, I think sometimes people can get a little misled by rookies. Hey, this guy isn't a star, this guy isn't a star. But if you can find starters from your rookie class, and not just the guys you drafted, but Damani Richardson might be a starter this year at safety. Jalen Coker showed really well as a rookie last year. He's going to factor into the wide receiver conversation once again. And then, Shaw Smith-Wade could end up being your starting nickel. Trevin Wallace is penciled in right now to be a starting linebacker. Obviously, Leggett, that's something that hadn't happened in the previous few years. So now you have a chance to stack another draft class onto guys who already showed that, hey, they can help out in some capacity from a year ago.
And that's always traditionally been how you build an NFL roster. You draft for longevity. You have player control for much longer. The salaries aren't as exorbitant if you go free agency. They did a good job in plugging positions that they needed to address right away, especially on defense, in free agency. And you get that. Someone like, we haven't talked about, but Trey McMerrick at safety was a huge addition. That's a 4-year, that's a long-term play there. But a lot of times you just kind of need to stop the bleeding with, you said, a historically bad run defense last year. These young players that you talked about are the core that will be here for a long time. And in a lot of cases, like Chuba Hubbard, get a second contract. Like J.C. Horn, Derek Brown, get a second contract. And that's where you really build your leaders and your culture from that point.
Yeah, and I had a chance to talk with Dan Morgan about that in the offseason. That's a big selling point. Hey, you come here as a draftee, you play well, you'll be rewarded, and you'll have a chance to have your name up in the Hall of Honor with some of the greats. And you look at Derek Brown, you look at J.C. Horn, you look at Chuba Hubbard, guys that you mentioned. I think we're looking at maybe Ike Ekwonu, big season for him, Bryce Young. Guys you hope can stick around for a long time and be a part of that homegrown core, because we've seen that movie before here. Homegrown core is what has led largely to the 2 best Panther teams.
This is like a kind of a smaller story in the big scheme of everything we're talking about, but somebody like Brady Christensen, who is not a starter, deciding to come back when he could have been a free agent starter somewhere else because he likes what's here.
Austin Corbett, too.
Austin Corbett, who's competing with Cade Mays at center. I mean, you've got guys here. We used to have, how are we going to cobble together 5 starting offensive linemen 2 years ago? Now we've got 9 deep right away. It's already, the house is almost full as far as the 2 deep goes, as far as the offensive line goes. But somebody as talented as Christensen and as versatile as he can fill it in so many positions, but also be a starter if you needed just a flat-out starter. That's really saying something when guys want to stick around for that.
Yeah, Christensen's a guy who last year repped at every position. He can play tackle, he can play guard, he can play center in a pinch. And then take a guy like Cade Mays, who was non-rostered at one point last year, brought back, and I thought acquitted himself quite well. He had that stretch, remember, 3 games in a row. He went up against Dexter Lawrence, Chris Jones, and then I think it was Jalen Carter in 3 consecutive weeks, and held his own.
You've got options, and you need that. It's a long season. There's going to be injuries. Nobody more than Austin Corbett knows that with back-to-back devastating injuries he's been fighting his way back from. Still, as you said, he still wanted to be here, wants to play more football, enjoys being a part of things here. So it's fun. It's good. I remember, we talk about the 10-year anniversary of the team that went to Super Bowl 50.
Yeah.
And what a family feel that team was. Guys that liked each other off the field, hung out off the field, didn't bolt for the door at the end of the workday. That's what they're building here, is a bunch of guys that enjoy being teammates, working the off-season together. But when they get out this practice field today, they could bolt for the first time to get to their car as quick as they can, and there are times you have to. But I think by and large, these guys enjoy getting better together.
Yeah, and again, I don't think you could stress the importance of continuity. And, one of those pieces, Andy Dalton coming back in the quarterback room, he has almost become a de facto quarterback's coach, mentor to Bryce Young, certainly. But as we saw last year, in a pinch, if he's somebody that has to step up, he knows the offense, he's got the trust of his receivers and his offense.
He's the perfect guy for what this team needs at that number 2 quarterback position, because he doesn't mind being a mentor. Joe Flacco's had a lot of success in this league. He was asked about having the young quarterbacks up in Cleveland. He said, I'm not here to mentor them. I'm here to win the starting job. If they learn by absorbing what I do in the meetings and on the field, so be it. But I'm trying to win this job. Here, Andy Dalton's not trying to unseat Bryce Young from his job. He's had a long, successful 14, 15-year career. He's happy to be where he is, which is the number 2 guy, starter when needed, when called upon, to be a full-on teacher, as you said. And then when he plays, he's productive. That game against Las Vegas was phenomenal, and he still got it. I mean, if needed over a stretch of time, Andy Dalton can be there, but he's also mentally in the right spot where he doesn't mind being that coach/player.
And one of the areas where, the Panthers really tried to address in the offseason, we talked about what they wanted to do up front, but addressing the pass rush, too. And I think it's easy to just look at the stat sheet and say, well, they didn't have this many sacks. Now, when you watch the games and you see how it unfolds, when you give up 6+ yards on first down, there's not a whole lot you can do in terms of pressure and pressure packages and blitzing and sending a 5th guy, just because you have to be wary of the run. And we saw teams run on 3rd and 5 against the Panthers last year. Mm-hmm. You have now strengthened the run defense. To me, forget personnel for a moment. That will only help the pass rush. Yeah. That puts more options on the table when you get into 2nd and long, 3rd and medium for a Giro.
And they addressed it in so many different ways. They drafted it with Princely and Scorton coming in. They acquired it the previous year with DJ Wanham. They were patient waiting for his recovery. And then you bring in a Patrick Jones.
Yes.
And we saw him drop back in coverage and get an interception in practice last week. So they addressed that rotation of edge guys in a lot of different ways while parting ways with Jadeveon Clowney. So I think they're going to attack that kind of by committee, but that's a talented committee. And they will benefit from what you said, having that interior defense to get their numbers up. And again, if you just affect the pass, if you get hurries, if you get hits on the quarterback, those things rack up during the course of the game. Yeah, sacks are important, no doubt. They're game changers. But even just getting that pressure, as we saw Princely do last week and get called out, as it turned out, he actually had what was a fine practice play getting near Bryce Young. But you need that, and you love that edge and that pressure coming.
Yeah, and with Princely and Nick Scorton, you give them the leash to come along slowly. Right. You don't have to rush them. You have Wanham, you have Pat Jones, guys that they can learn from, and then you rotate them in. You see what kind of opportunities they get and what they do with those opportunities. And then obviously I think the hope is later in the season those guys have bigger roles. You still have DJ Johnson in the mix. Amari Barno was let go in practice at the end of last week. The positions I think that we'll be watching closely, inside linebacker, with Josie Jewell not being able to play with the concussions, he was let go. So you've got Trevin Wallace, you've got Christian Roseboom, not a whole lot beyond those two. I think at cornerback and certainly in the secondary. You get past Mike Jack, you get past J.C. Horn. Shamar Bartholomew, to me, is a guy who's interesting. He was rostered all of last year. He had the most waiver claims of any player at the end of cuts last year. The Panthers had the number 1 claim. They were able to get him. And then in the secondary, you got Merrick. You know what he's going to bring to the table, a guy who can play in the box, big hitter. Damani Richardson, still inexperienced. You got a rookie in Lathan Ransom. Is that an area where Dan Morgan maybe goes out and gets a veteran who was let go by somebody else?
I think if need be, and I think that's what these sessions are about, is learning, not if they're finished products, but where is Ransom right now? What is his development being a rookie player? What can you expect of some of these guys that may have it? Like, we didn't know a year ago at this time that Damani Richardson would be the impact player he is. So just because we don't know doesn't mean it can't develop. It may not be here in July, but during the course of the season, those guys, again, given the time they need to cook, can develop and become the kind of players you want. And if they're not, that's where you make those. The roster is a floating piece of art that is always changing. It's never a still frame. So it's always going to be something when you need to, you can add to it. When you have an injury, you add to it. But I think they're wanting to see what they've got with some of the guys they brought in, because everybody's here for a reason. Everybody's here because they like them to some degree to make this roster or fill some kind of a need.
Yeah, and the bottom line is, from what we saw on this field a year ago to now, far more depth.
Yeah. And you mentioned corner, we don't know. Inside linebacker, we don't know because of the Josie Jewell thing. But you might have depth, and it's just not had the chance to show what it can do yet. But that's what it is. Overall, I think there's a great sense of, like, this team is deeper. It can survive a Josie Jewell not being able to play and moving on. So we'll see. And we talk about these young guys that are coming in. Trevin Wallace was a guy last year who wore the green dot for a while. A lot was asked of him right away, as he was able to do a lot, but then he became, like, by de facto, because of injuries,
he had to
leader on the field.
And then before he got hurt, he was thrown into the fire. I remember that first game in Chicago. We talked to him after the game. He basically admitted to us, he goes, hey, yeah, my head was spinning.
Yeah.
Head on a swivel, and we saw what the Bears tried to do. They tried to go fast and make him get set quickly, and that was a big ask. But again, you didn't have Shaq Thompson, you didn't have Josie Jewell in that game, so there weren't a lot of options. For the most part, especially on offense, there are more options. If you have an injury to the offensive line this year, Christensen, Zavala, Cade Mays, potentially Yosh Nijman, right? You got all these guys who can step in. 2 years ago, a couple injuries on the offensive line, it tanked the season.
Right, and it does. It stops the whole flow. When you can't block, you can't run what you've designed. You can't pass protect the play you've designed, so you're hurting yourself there. So the depth along the offensive line and the knowing talent that you have, these are guys that have been around. This is talent you know. You know basically their range of how good they're going to be. I do like in the running back room how they add Rico Dowdle from Dallas, because a lot of teams will go, and it's fine to do this, different style running backs. So you certainly have third down backs on this roster and scat backs and big bowling ball backs, but they kind of duplicate a little bit of the skill set of Chuba Hubbard, so that you run your offense kind of the same way when Rico Dowdle is in there, the way you do with a Chuba Hubbard.
And you're actually seeing a lot more of that now across the NFL. And Dowdle last year for the Cowboys, 1,000-yard rusher. I think he had close to $150 against the Panthers on this very field.
We added that total.
We did. Another South Carolina kid, by the way. He played his college ball at the University of South Carolina. So you got Rico Dowdle, who gets to be a Carolina Panther. And then beyond him, we know Jonathan Brooks is out, but they went and got Trevor Etienne, rookie out of Georgia, who played his college ball at Florida as well. Another guy with great speed, averaged better than 5.5 yards per carry in college. He's also an option in the return game, and returns this year. We're going to talk to Tracy Smith at some point on one of these live streams. I think there's going to be a lot more emphasis because that's hidden yardage, especially with the new kickoff rules.
Absolutely. Take advantage of that. The rules are designed now where you can get those hidden yards, as you say. And ETN, the fact they spent a fourth-round pick on a running back a year after spending a second-round pick on a running back they were waiting to rehab tells you that they're very committed to running the ball. But also you've hedged your bet against, in case Brooks is out, and he may very well be for the entire season, you've got another young developing running back who helps with special teams. So he kind of duplicates a little bit to some degree of what Jonathan Brooks might have done in the run game, but he adds the whole special teams element as well. And you got Raheem Blackshear. So again, you just have depth.
And Jimmy Horn.
So you've got depth, and Renfro can do that, and David Moore can do that. You've got all these different backs and receivers that can help with special teams.
When I look at the offense, to me, one of the key things in 2025 is if the offense, and it starts with the quarterback, obviously with Bryce Young, if he just takes that next step, this team will be instantly better. If he takes that great leap, this has a chance to be a really good offense.
And I think the expectation for when they drafted him, even with a different coaching regime, was he doesn't have to be the best quarterback. He doesn't have to be Dan Marino. He doesn't have to be Joe Montana. They want a point guard. If he can distribute the ball to all the guys, run the offense, distribute the ball, he may never end up being like a big stats leader in this league, but run the offense efficiently. Again, we're not talking about the game manager. We're not talking to that term, which is actually a compliment in many cases. But if he could just distribute the ball, run the offense, be smart, those things will make everything around him work. He doesn't have to do it by himself is what I'm saying. He doesn't have to be the Patrick Mahomes, I'm the star of the show. I either have to pass for it or run 20 yards for it. He's got talent around him that he's supposed to utilize.
Yeah, and again, you have him on a rookie contract for 2 to 3 more years. With the talent that he has around him, the continuity, the familiarity, even a guy like T-Mac, Tedero McMillan, the rookie, those guys have known each other since high school. They played against each other in high school. Bryce lobbied for the team to draft him.
He did. Stood on the table, they say. And I don't know, he kind of refuted the standing on the table part. But anyways, there's a connection there, and there's a comfortability, and that's where you're building team chemistry with a guy that I think that's going to be one of, obviously, first-round pick, and a high first-round pick at that. That's going to be a lot of intrigue, is like, doesn't have to be week one, but what's that going to look like over the course of the entire season? Because the expectation is when you do make that kind of a move, instead of going defense, he's going to be a number one receiver, and he's going to change the complexion of this offense.
All right, he's Jim Szoke. I'm Anish Shroff. We hope you enjoyed this Panther stream of practice. We will be back with you August 1st. That is the next live stream. Catch it on Twitter, catch it on YouTube, and on Panthers.com. For Jim, I'm Anish. We'll see you next time.